Right. Very good. So just think about your basic stance for a few moments. Feet are hip width apart, and you have some leeway in that depending on which part of the foot you measure that from. The inside gives you a slightly narrower stance, and then the outside gives you a slightly narrower stance, the inside slightly wider. So you have a little bit of that. It will vary really according to what suits you. We want to be thinking of 3 parallel lines: one, shoulders, hips, feet, whichever part of the foot is appropriate, and then a parallel line going down through the middle of your body. And if it's helpful to think in these terms, series of horizontal lines, starting with, say, the floor, the surface you're standing on, which will be level, probably, and then maybe across your hips, across your solar plexus, across your shoulders, so you can build up this little sort of grid, if you like, that you can orientate yourself in. And from the side, similar, knees roughly above the balls of your feet, hips above your ankles. That will increase when we sink down into the postures. Obviously, your hips are going to move back a little bit. And again, if you want a parallel line down there, so you've got this 3-dimensional grid, a bit like you might use a map, a series of grids on a map to help you to sort of like work out where you are. Weight a little bit forwards with your knees like that, and again, hips dropping back, and the feeling of just allowing your center of gravity, or if you prefer, you can think of your pelvis, or a third alternative might be to think of your torso sort of sliding down between your legs, but one way or another, your weight beginning to drop down more into your legs and just turning in the middle of your body. So the area between hips and waist moves, and certainly in the upper part of your body, ribs, shoulders, and then arms and hands will naturally follow that movement. You may also notice a little bit of change in how the weight in your legs is distributed. We, as much as possible, will keep it to 50% in each leg, but you may feel just a slight change. Ideally, keep it at 50%, but if you do find you're being pulled over, then first of all, maybe just reduce the amount of movement in the center a little bit. But it may also be that something is tightening up somewhere, and effectively when you push, if you meet resistance, what it might do is push you over, and that can be very, very subtle, and it's important not to just ignore that. But one of the things that we're constantly looking at doing in Tai Chi is to identify areas where there's a tightening up, and there are inevitably some at all levels of Tai Chi, and then working in one way or another to release those areas. And that might be by thinking about the posture or how we're doing the movement, a more kind of analytical approach. It might be, if you've experienced in Tai Chi, just a sense of this is where I want to go, and so your intent focuses on the feeling of the movement. Or it might be just waiting until one or other of the exercises kind of touches that area, and the movement itself begins to, for want of a better term, erode that tightness, that stiffness. And depending on the circumstances and what you're looking to do, you might use a combination of those effects. Sometimes in arts like this, you get phrases like fire and water method. These are to describe, to an extent, those different approaches. And in some lineages, they'll have different sets of exercises for them. But a lot of it is to do with training your attention, training your mind, training your intent. And in the ones that I just described, a very analytical approach, you know, do my hips need to be here or something like that? Can I change this? Might be classified as fire, kind of quite kind of penetrating in a way. On the other hand, this idea of just letting the movement flow and ease those areas might be described as water. And I think depending on your circumstances, you can employ either or both in conjunction with each other. If you find, for instance, that you're getting so caught up on that shoulder and is it here or is it here or should my head be like this or whatever, that it's distracting you, then my suggestion would be either just shift your attention to some other part of the body or some other aspect of the movement, always remembering that overall we're looking for a holistic view of the body rather than a compartmentalized one. Or maybe stay with your attention on that area, but be more kind of water-like in your approach. And there's no rule about which is better or worse, I think, in these circumstances. What worked yesterday might not work today. And just sort of a certain amount of patience and understanding is brought to bear as we do these things. Some of those blockages, some of those areas of holding might be long term, maybe an old injury or condition that you've had for a while, or just sort of, you know, all sorts of things can affect our posture. Things that have happened to us in our lives, the work that we've done, the activities we've been involved in, partially shape our body and our mind. And everything should be done with a long-term view. Some things will just melt away, which is great when that happens, but others you just have to be a little bit more patient with. But gradually, just feeling that the quality of movement within your body becomes smoother, more fluid, more rhythmic, more balanced, harmonious. Sometimes we find that an image is useful, and obviously this can be a very personal thing. With those areas of tightness and stiffness, what we're often told is we want to feel that they're releasing, letting go of them, opening, different terminology. And for me, I'll come closer so you can see, for me, that's the difference between this. This is a very tightly clenched fist, and I can feel the stiffness going right up my arm there. Whereas if I can just go from this to this, you can see there's a little space now in the fist, and that tightness largely just disappears. And if you can get that feeling in one part of your body, that's why I use the fist, then you have an idea about what you're looking to feel in that stiff shoulder or that tight spot in your back. And you can almost visualize that happening. You can train what we would call in Tai Chi your intent. So Tai Chi and Qigong are intended movements, intentional movements. We try to move deliberately, but without a sort of hard concentration. We always work on improving the precision of our movements, for one thing. We're always looking to improve the quality of the movement. It's an ongoing process. And really good way to think about these arts is that they're moving meditations. you're obviously exercising. So you don't need to sort of decide that you're exercising, but that element of meditation brings in our attention, our mind in one way or another. Mind could cover our thoughts, our feelings, our memories, all sorts of things. And this is not about mind over matter, and it's not to say that it's all in the mind, but rather to recognize that in Tai Chi, we're really working in an area where body and mind overlap. So the term body-mind is quite an interesting one. As your arms swing round here, maybe you can hear, come a bit closer, maybe that will help. You can hear perhaps where my hands sort of strike the body there and there. I sometimes think of this as hitting a drum and getting that sense of resonance from the drum. When you hit it, you can feel the vibration. If you're holding the drum, you can feel the vibration in the whole instrument. And that's an interesting image of the sort of tonal quality in our body that we're looking for. Which means that eventually, theoretically, it's possible for us to develop these movements to a point where, to use a phrase from the old Tai Chi writings, when one part of our body is in motion, our whole body is in motion. Our whole body is one way or another connected. And this leads us to a sense of the movement as one movement through the body. And that's not a bad way of trying to get a sense for what we would refer to sometimes as the energy in the movement or of the movement. And like in much of Chinese medicine, a key goal here, a key outcome that we're looking for is for a harmony to develop. Again, to quote the old writings in Tai Chi, that there should be no breaks in the movement, no jarring in the movement, ideally. Remember that all of these are aspirations, in the sense that they're things that we would like to happen. Recognize where you are today, whether you're new to this or whether you're more experienced. We want to first recognize what's happening for us at this particular moment. Try not to think, well, yesterday I could do this, or yesterday it felt like this. Today's a new day. So in this opening exercise, we get the benefit of a slightly faster movement, has a gentle aerobic quality, but it also gives us a framework within which we can begin to reflect on these various things. And just raising your arms a little bit. And here, you see if I stop, you see my hands are about shoulder height, my elbows significantly lower. I need to move back a bit, otherwise my fingertips will disappear. It's quite difficult to keep your arms out there without tightening up, stiffening up in the big muscles of the arms. And this brings us to another important element in Tai Chi, which is to think about where the support for our body comes from. Your hands drop down. Still in the parallel stance, just and still as much as possible with your hips dropping back, rocking your weight forwards and back. Easy and gently. And don't go too far. If you go a long way forwards, you'll either stumble forwards or stiffen up. But just try and get a sense of moving very, very gently from side to side. And I mentioned a couple of times this center line, both from the front and from the side. And if you think about this, if I get this pole, it's almost like, if you can imagine the pole somehow fixed to the ground, like a tent pole, shall we say, just holding the tent up, and it just swings a little bit from side to side. So I'm here, and it just does this and this. That's on a kind of physical level. In terms of our awareness, one of the things that we're looking for is if I go forwards here, physically the line has changed, obviously, but I want to remain aware of a kind of imaginary line here, because that's one of the things like we might use a grid line in a map. They don't exist in reality, but if you're trying to navigate, it can be useful to know where the grid lines on the map might be. The physical line can be a way into understanding something about what we might think of as the inner structure of Tai Chi. You can think of your skeleton for a start. Think of the bones of your legs, pelvis, and spine in particular, just floating a little bit forwards and backwards, supported by the soft tissue of the body in one way or another, like the tent pole is supported by the guy ropes and the pegs. Never getting to a point where there's a real stiffening, where there's a straining. One of the sayings in Tai Chi that I find quite interesting is that outside there should be the softness of cotton, inside the hardness of steel. Cotton is soft but very strong. Steel is quite hard, but in metallic terms is relatively soft. So there's a combination there. And so it's an indication of this idea of inner strength. Again, a very personal image for me that I find quite interesting is if I get a balloon and you slowly push your finger into the balloon, you meet more and more resistance until eventually it's quite hard work. But it would never be like jamming your finger against a wall. It's always a soft resistance. So we might think of the body becoming denser inside. These are, again, aspirations within Tai Chi, but it can be useful to recognize that when we start to lose that tightness in our shoulders or our back or our arms, it's often been there for a long time. In those moments when it seems to drain away, we don't just collapse on the ground. There is still remaining within the body a means of support. That points us in the direction of that inner strength. And as you get more experienced, you learn to sort of move from that point. So the big muscles, say, of your arms, and this is quite important with the arms, you're not holding on tight, not holding on tight in your back. So there's a flow of movement through there, which in the case of your arms, then those muscles in your arms and other things as well, it's not just the muscles, begin to offer those movements a shape. So now coming to the midpoint and letting your hips sink back and down with that same idea. So you could, for instance, think of your weight going down into your feet and then your feet gently pushing against the ground to push your hips up, and then gravity drawing your hips down. You could add into that idea that your legs are like springs, and as you sink down, you load the spring, and then eventually the spring will push your hips up. It will also push down through your feet. You can imagine straddling a big ball and dropping down, and eventually the ball will push you up. And again, as you get more used to this, you can imagine the ball here in the middle of your body rather than outside the body. And so there's this sense of, for want of a better term, let's call it compression as you sink down. And then what will happen? The ball will expand, and you'll get that movement downwards, keeping you connected to the ground, keeping your root, but also pushing the upper body up. So again, which image you use depends on what works best for you at any particular time. No one idea, no one image will ever encapsulate the whole of these movements. Now bring your hands around, and the shape that you want here is as though you're cradling a ball. And as you push up, that movement up through the body moves your arms, and then sinking down. Try and keep the whole body moving. If you suddenly just start moving your arms and forget about your hips sinking and being pushed up, for instance, then you'll stiffen up in those areas. You'll fall back into old habits of movement and posture. So try and keep that sense of the whole body. Moving as one unit. Remember earlier I was saying this holistic view of the movement. And the emphasis in this exercise, as always, is going to be the dropping of our center of gravity. This is one of the key things. The lower your center of gravity, the more stable you will be. The less need there is to sort of hold your weight up by your shoulders, for instance, or whatever it is. But remember that old habits of movement and posture don't just miraculously go away. In many ways, I think we can think of Tai Chi as a process of unlearning, gradually replacing old habits of movement and posture with somewhat different approaches. Now bring your hands out to your sides. The exercise, the wild goose. Just be aware that when we use an image, unlike in some other methods, which often take your attention away to somewhere else, but often with good effect, by the way. It's the opposite way around in Tai Chi. We're trying to bring qualities that are evoked by that image into the movement. And we want to do that as soon as possible. So again, we really do want to pick the right image. And if an image is not working for you, then don't worry about it. There'll be another one. If the image is too distracting, so one image that we often use is that we're moving through water. And you start to think, oh, I'm moving through water. Wouldn't it be nice to be by the sea, have a little swim, blah, 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 blah. Then actually it's not helpful. And if it keeps doing that, then there are other images. You know, you can imagine the air around you is a bit thicker than normal. If the image of the bird in flight with this one, the wild goose, is a good one, then you know that sense, that powerful movement of the bird, the graceful fluid movement of the bird may invoke something. If it doesn't, then a different image might be, for instance, here you imagine underneath the palm of each hand a small ball, and you're in water, and as you sink down, you're pressing the balls down, and then the buoyancy of the water pushes your hands up, and you just let them come up slowly and then down again. Now, let your hands drop down, crossing in front of your belly, come forwards again. You see the first thing that happens is my elbows go out, and that draws my fingers around into movement we call part in the clouds. So here, the circle is a very natural movement. My elbows go out, but then they start to drop down. So rather than thinking of stretching up, think of this movement here. And as my elbow goes down, you see how my hand circles out. Try not to get to here and think, well, I'll go a bit further. To see how far you can move with that quality of movement without straining. Quite tricky with a movement that goes above your head. That. It's tricky anyway, but I think trickier with the movements that go above your head. The pace of the movement is taken from speed that your hips are sinking down and pushing up. So it's from feet, legs, and hips. Moving your arms for you. It's very easy for your arms to sort of take over here. Do one more of these. And then let your hands come down and push up, and just on one side again, the elbow moves first, so that draws your fingers up. At the top of the movement, wind your arm around and sink down. Dragon plucks the stars from the sky. And in that moment when you're winding your arm around, just see if you can find a position for your arm that allows the weight of your arm to flow down through your shoulder, not like this, but like this. So you're not straining to hold your arm up. Hips still pushing up and then sinking down. Move your arm to begin with. But what you might like to try this time or some other time is to reduce that movement. The downward movement is your body yielding to the pull of gravity. And as I've already said, the upward movement is the springiness in legs or the ball or whatever image is working for you. And so long as we're not actively resisting the pull of gravity, that's a movement that will work within your body, whether or not your hips are actively going up and down. So sometimes we can get to a point where we just stand like this. You see my hips are dropping back slightly. And I'm allowing the movement of gravity through my body, which means there must be that response from my body. Otherwise, I would just, again, collapse. What I don't want to do, though, is this, because now you can see I'm pushing myself up and I'm trying to do this and I'm falling forwards. So that's quite a tricky one, and there's a lot of trial and error in it. You make that smaller and smaller movement in your hips until you get to a point where you lose those sensations within your body, wherever you're feeling them, and then you go back to the bigger movement and develop the whole thing again. Now, let your hands drop down and your hips just drop back a little bit. A rounded feeling in your hips, your knees, and your ankles. So the joints are quite soft. And bring your hands up to this position. You see my hands are slightly in front of my head, not back there. As soon as I do that, I'm getting very tight. So just a little bit in front of my head, not too far, not right out there. And from the front, you'll see that my elbows are out. Hips stay just dropping back slightly, but not up and down. Let your hands come down from that position, out beside your hips, and then try that again. Your body expanding and contracting. and see if you can just return to that more comfortable position. Again, you won't get it every time, but eventually you'll come to know roughly where this feeling is, and eventually that's just going to have an effect on your daily movements. When you lift your head, when you lift your hands up to get something off a shelf or something like that. Now alternate that upward movement with a sideways movement, and again we're trying to find a way to maintain this position without the straining. It's quite difficult again with your hands out to the sides. So do the upward movement, rest there for a moment, then let your hands come back down. And then pushing out to the sides. Rest there for a moment, and imagine that you've got little sort of loops of string around your wrist, and that your arms are hanging from the ceiling and back. So whatever the movement we're doing, and again, it's quite tricky with some of these movements, we're trying to maintain that quality of movement within the body, the potential for a free flow of movement. So the space within your body for movement to take place. So if I go from here to here, I'm now tight in my back. That's blocking the movement. And your range of movement will gradually increase. It's not, we're not really thinking about that. We're thinking, can I still feel movement within the body? This flow of the energy. And this time, as you push your hands out, you turn in your hips, being careful not to twist up your back, tightening your back. So the whole of your upper body is turning back and then facing the front and pushing out. So thinking about how we do this movement, experienced people, it's a regular movement, and yet always there's a great deal going on in these exercises. You may notice the difference between one side of your body and another. And notice again, if I come a little bit closer, there's a rotation all the way through my arm here and here. I don't want to sort of stiffen my shoulders up to block that rotation. Now, let your arms drop down just for a moment, with the weight of your arms hanging from the shoulders. And then use the expansive aspect of the movement within your body to push one hand out until it's above your head. And again, trying to find a position where weight flows down through your body. And then your arm follows that movement down and going more or less down the center line of your body. Again, there's a very natural rotation there. And then from this position, if it's comfortable, just add a little turn here. So both this one and the previous exercise, we had this rotation in that area between hips and waist, and that becomes an important focal point for our attention. Change sides. Notice any difference between one side and another. The rhythm of the movement is governed by this expansion and then contraction. And again, we're looking for a sense of equality, of harmony between them. Again, if it's comfortable, add in the turn. Back to the standing position. Our center can rotate horizontally, but it can also rotate vertically. And when I do that, you can see it changes the alignment of my upper body. I still want to keep in the back of my mind this idea of the vertical line, or lines, if you prefer to think of it like that. When I push my hips back, my shoulders go forward. I can sink down a little bit perhaps, and to bring my head and shoulders back to the upright, I let gravity pull my hips down, so the rotation takes me back, and then I can push up. The next two exercises make use of this. They're both quite strong exercises. So I do them quite big, so hopefully you can get an idea of what I'm doing. Don't feel you have to do them that big. Just think about this principle. The first one is rowing a boat in the middle of the lake, hips going back, shoulders going forwards. And then from here, hips just dropping back and feeling your head, shoulders coming up. So if we can find a good posture, the way that I was describing, and if we can yield to the pull of gravity, very specifically in our hips, then we can begin to use the pull of gravity to help us to come upright. And then the next exercise is called polishing the table. So this time, come around, bring your hands in front of you. First of all, turn. So we introduce the horizontal turn again, then push your hips back and turn the other way and come to the upright position. And that movement will just extend your hands out. If your hands were resting on the table or on a ball, perhaps, the table doesn't appeal, then they would naturally be pushed forwards. So don't strain in your arms to stretch them out. One more time on each side. And let your hands drop. Shake out. So just to explain a little bit more what I was talking about there. Again, if I take this body, if this is the center line of the body, and it tilts forwards like that, then especially if I had a weight on the opposite end and it was really heavy, what I might choose to do instead is to push on this side here, push on this end of the stick and let it come up. Hit me in the nose. There. And that idea, if this is your hips, gravity is pulling you down. If you can allow that to happen, if you get used to letting gravity work through your body, your hips being pulled down will bring your head and shoulders up. Again, that is quite simplistic, but it's actually, in basic principle, one of the key things that we're trying to do. So now, changing the stance, turn your left foot out somewhere between 30 and 45 degrees. Step forwards about the same distance as the width across your hips, maybe a little bit longer. And just begin to transfer your weight from one leg to another. You're going to about 70% of your weight in your back leg when you move back, and about 60% in your front leg when you move forwards. And the key thing is, again, or one of the key things is to really allow your hips to drop. With the pole again, if we often have the habit, and it's a good reason, it can be useful, of leaning forwards to help ourselves move forwards, but you can see that could pull me over. Once again, if gravity working on my hips freely is allowed to work, then that can help me to stay upright. So that awareness of that pull down through hips, lower back, buttocks, really. We really want to sort of like be aware of that area, apply as much as possible those qualities of softening in one way or another. And it helps us to keep an upright and stable stance while we're moving our weight and ultimately while we're stepping. So you go into your back foot and just raise your front toes, a little bit more of your weight sinks into your back leg. You can have the front foot a little bit turned out here. Push your back knee forwards when you're in the front leg. And again, more of your weight goes into the leg until eventually about all that's remaining in what we would call the empty leg in Tai Chi is the weight of the leg itself. And then with a minimal amount of effort, we bring the foot in and push it back out. It's quite a short step. It's not a long stride by any means. Planting the foot down. So again, we're maintaining this posture, but quite a dynamic movement. So really, you know, when it works, we're really helping this internal flow. So try that with your other foot forwards. Don't overextend. When you move, look for that feeling of unclenching in ankles, hips, and most particularly in your knees. And it's quite difficult. It takes a while for muscles of the legs to condition to allow you to do that. So you might not get the whole 60% or 70% of your weight in to begin with. As always, go nice and gently. And then turn the front foot out, raising your toes and your heel. stepping in. And then take a few steps through, whichever direction you have room in. Try and get your foot planted on the ground, excuse me, before you commit your weight. And then in the other direction, try and keep the width of your step. Again, right foot forwards. Now, bringing our arms back into the movement, you push forwards, and with a slight delay, as you would expect if you were in water, for instance, you let your hands swing through and then back. This fisherman cast a net. And you can see there's, again, a very natural curve to the pattern of movement in my fingers. I'm not trying to lift the arm. And again, looking for that wave-like movement from your back foot through into your upper body and your arms, but also down into the front foot. And let that wave move your body for you. Fisherman cast in there. One more time. And then bring your hands down in front of you, and there's still this natural curve. Hands are facing forwards, and as that wave moves you forwards, that pushes your hands away and they curve up. And you turn them palm up and you come down. You let your elbows go out of it. It's called pushing wave. Slightly more focused and directed than the previous movement. And as a result, slightly stronger feel to the movement. Slightly more compact as well. Your arms aren't sort of swinging out to the sides there. There's more of a kind of shape there, shall we say. And an intent, you're pushing against something. Do this one more time. And then as your hands come down, keep them palm down and turn. Turn towards your back foot so that your hands are brought across your hip. Again, they swing up and then go forwards and turn. Let them come down across your front hip. Turn a little bit more and swing them out and back. So we've now brought in again that horizontal movement, guiding our hands through this. You think of it as a sideways figure of 8 movement, or some people like to think about an infinity sign. Good, and then just shake out. Have your left foot forwards and go through the same 3 movements again. So starting with fisherman castanet. One more time. As you come back, just bringing your hand in. It's a simple change to pushing wave. But it does have a very different feel. We now have the intent to push against something. So again, we have this quality of internal strength beginning to build. And then as we come back, we turn. So again, it's really just only one change, just slight differences in the arms, but our arms learn to follow the movement in the middle of the body. That and the transfer of the weight. If our weight goes forwards, as a general principle, our hands will go forwards, unless otherwise directed by the center of the body. Our center turns to the left. That will be the overall direction of our arms, and so on and so forth. Again, it gets more complex than that, but as a starting point, that's a useful one. And it's good to remember, some of these exercises can be very complex. It's good to remember the basic simplicity underlying them. Now, turn your front foot out, and this time, as your arms come up, bring your foot in, step forwards, and transfer your weight. And again, if you find you're a bit unstable, bringing your foot through, just let it rest down for a moment. Remember those grid lines, and what you might want to do, for instance, is put your foot down and just, oh, hold on, you might want to adjust in the hips or something like that. And then going back. And bringing your feet parallel. Shake out. Excellent. Now rubbing your hands together. And again, with that sense of almost tapping a drum, start by tapping the face. And then the shoulder and your arm. The other side. Once you're back with the sides of your hands very lightly over your back. Around your hips. And your legs. Lightly on your belly and onto the upper part of your chest. So whichever of those ideas or images were working for you, those are the things to really take away with you. So To finish the session, come back to this parallel stance, the Wuchi stance, as it's sometimes referred to. Hips dropping back. Just take a couple of slow, gentle breaths. See if you can feel that support from within your body. And then, once again, letting your hips drop back and pushing up. Contracting and expanding. And then from this downward position, pushing up, arms coming out, and then coming forwards a little bit as though they're wrapping around a ball held against your chest. Let your elbows drop. Feel your hips already beginning to yield to the pull of gravity, and coming back slowly and gently to the rooted position. Embrace tiger, return to mountain. And just have a sense for, again, whatever image, whatever idea, whatever aspect of the session you found helpful, just as something that is going to stay with you, rather than thinking, oh, I must understand this or I must understand that. There's plenty of time with these things. One more time. And stand. A couple of slow, gentle breaths to finish. And shake out. Lovely. Thank you very much, everybody.